The story begins with an introduction to the Knights of the Red Lion, who served the Rojas Empire. Each of its members, regardless of gender and age, was distinguished by selflessness and courage. They were feared by almost everyone around them. The main reason for such cruelty and fear of the order was their commander, Kalia, Taxiate. She loyally protected the ruling family from attempts on their lives and kept neighboring states at bay. The girl was actually very young and not of noble birth, but in her years, she became the most famous swordsman in the entire empire. But her main merit was that she stopped the war, which lasted 7 years. The girl was sitting in front of the mirror. In her hands, she held a pregnancy test which showed 2 lines, and this could only mean one thing, and the stranger was very afraid of this. The appearance of a child now was undesirable. She couldn't believe it. Because of the constant training and physical exertion, as well as special equipment for female knights, all female members of the order were infertile and could not have children. The poor girl didn't expect this. She began to remember her past, when she was an orphan and fought every day for her existence. Thanks to her intelligence and level of development, she saved the Duke's son. At that time, the heir was 6 years old, and the ruler took her to his estate. It was there that she was taught the art of fencing, and she was supposed to learn to read and write, as well as master various types of weapons. Balancing her entire life between life and death, the girl eventually became the commander-in-chief of the Order of the Imperial Court. The former dirty orphan became the one the entire empire greeted and bowed to. But for a long time, what she wanted so much remained inaccessible to her. But now she prayed that it was not a dream. The girl was happy that she had finally become pregnant and could become a mother for her offspring. Unbridled energy took over the girl. She couldn't find a place to rest from excitement, mixed with joy at the fact that she would have a small child. But suddenly one logical question arose. Who was the father of the unborn child? Kalia had no other options but Simon Tyloran. Despite his young age, he was the archmage of the empire and the ruler of the state of Rojas. They fought side by side throughout the long war, shoulder to shoulder. Their friendship began to grow into something more. After all, Simon was the duke she had saved from death. Over time, the senselessness of what had happened dawned on her. After all, it so happened that she became pregnant by her best friend. For some reason, the situation seemed to her at least strange and unacceptable. And what was even more unnerving was that the one night they spent together could be called foolish and a complete coincidence. After all, if we were talking about something serious, the girl and her friend had never felt anything. Kalia swore, but she corrected herself in time. She asked the child to forgive her for swearing. After all, she was very used to it on the battlefield, but from now on, she would avoid it and fight the habit. The girl understood that now she should surround her future child only with good things and good phenomena. For some reason, she was surprised by the excitement that arose after the words, "my baby, my child." It was extraordinary. For a long time, she thought she was only concerned with her own survival. That's why she continued to hold on until the very end. Sometimes Kalia dreamed of the family she never had. And even though she had the faintest hopes and dreams that one day she would be able to create it fully and be like all her friends and colleagues. After all, it's nice to return to someone after a long journey. And now, when she got the chance to have a child, she immediately realized that she would fight for it to the end, because this was her future, her chance to give birth and create a real family, which she had dreamed of all these years. Kalia thought about telling Simon that he was the real father of the child, but she quickly changed her mind. The Duke's family could not allow a child from a non-noble girl to appear in their family. All the members of the family, except Simon, were very unpleasant people. The people also did not like them very much, but were forced to obey them, because apart from this ruling family, no one could protect the lands of Rojas. Kalia wondered how the future father himself would react to the news about the baby. Would he dare to offer to get rid of the child? This could not happen, although the young man did not really like people. She didn't expect to be thrilled about it, but she will fight for the child's life to the last, because it is simply a gift from heaven, and a blessing for her to be a mother from higher powers and providence. So no one will stop her. Kalia also believed that she had enough material resources to raise and protect her own child from anything that might come her way in the future. And she didn't necessarily have to marry Simon. The wedding with the Duke's son somehow didn't even fit into her head. After all, since childhood they were like brothers and grew up together. They were also the best drinking buddies and spent the nights chatting. In addition, during the last meeting, he started to hint at the right age for marriage. Simon even talked about his future plans for marriage and starting a family, and the girl had the impression that her friend's heart was taken by someone else. So she decided not to talk about her pregnancy. After all, she was afraid of any reaction from her friend and the father of her child. But if anyone even mentions the fact that she should have gotten rid of the child, even if it's Simon himself, she will not hesitate to chop him into small pieces and feed him to the dogs and animals. Although her friend and father had powerful magic skills, and it was quite difficult to defeat him, it was still possible. For the sake of the child, she was ready to do anything. Kalia stopped herself thinking that she was ready to kill. But the situation could get worse and have an unknown ending if she doesn't start giving birth to something for this. So it's worth making a plan and sticking to it so that no one guesses anything prematurely. This method was supposed to preserve the child and its well-being as much as possible, and not harm Simon in any way as a future contender for the role of father. But one way did exist, and it was the girl's only hope. Kalia thought that it was time to leave her post and position and return to a normal, peaceful existence. She stood by her military uniform and remembered everything she had been through. The next day, she stood in full uniform, looking at herself in the mirror. The girl tried to distract herself from her disturbing thoughts, but the absurd question that kept running through her mind was why she was making golden down jackets. But suddenly, she remembered how Simon had once told her that pure gold accumulated and stored mana reserves the longest. He asked the girl why she could not remember and assimilate this. The friend always asked Simon what he thought was stupid about her, and constantly asked if her brain was also made of muscles, that she couldn't really study or learn anything new. It's time for the hero of the 7 Years' War to disappear. After all, she will no longer be able to behave on the battlefield the way she did before she became a mother and carried a new life inside her. Simon will also be calmer. Kalia was descending the stairs in her commander-in-chief costume. A squire saw her. The girl's name was Cayman Huggins, and she was simply delighted with her mistress. Cayman considered her the greatest hero. And also, in her opinion, Kalia's glory covered even the sun, and every inhabitant of the empire had to pray to her mistress. The girl was for her a god of war and a monster of the forces of good, who would always stand up for the disadvantaged. The commander's biography always surprised the girl. After all, Kalia saved the duke's son at the age of 6. At 15, she officially passed the exam in the ranks of the knightly order and scored the maximum score for it. At 17, she already had the first degree of swordsmanship, and by 19, she had mastered the maximum in fencing and sword-fighting skills, and she was made Simon's personal bodyguard. No one in the whole world can rival Kalia. She was rightly considered a genius among geniuses, and the 7 Years' War was direct proof of this, and no gossip or rumors bother the commander. The servant asked Kalia if she had just decided to travel somewhere. In that case, Cayman would have to prepare the crew for the journey. But the general replied that this time she would go on business alone. A moment later, the girl brought the white horse to her commander. It was stamping its hooves and preparing for the journey. Kalia's faithful horse was always by her side when she decided to go somewhere or went on a hike. The stallion, named White, was a very beautiful horse, fit for the emperor himself. But luckily, Kalia, who admired the animal and respected its intelligence, became its owner. Suddenly, she asked Cummin to prepare a carriage for the lady. The girl certainly did not expect this. She had never seen the mistress order a carriage to be prepared for her. Kalia thought that she still didn't understand anything about how a pregnant woman should behave and feel, but riding a horse right now would definitely be unnecessary for her and her baby. So she decided to let herself relax. Finally, she arrived at the ruler's palace. It was full of guests. As usual, most of them were talking about some trifles and nonsense, which was typical of people who, out of boredom, start doing anything just to have fun. Now, the topic of discussion was Simon's magical engraving, which he himself had done with enviable skill. The young ladies could not take their eyes off the engraved bracelet and envied the prince. Kalia, meanwhile, walked and thought about what to tell the crown prince. Was it really worth revealing the truth about her pregnancy? But this was already a last resort, which he would use in case of refusal from the ruler. She was met by a person she did not want to see, and the meeting with whom was very unpleasant for her. It was Lady Elena, Turlone. The young lady asked Kalia why she hadn't been to the palace for so long. Had she really fallen ill? Elena approached the girl and noticed that she had lost a lot of weight and had changed outwardly. The girl continued to touch Kalia. The warrior girl looked at her opponent across from her. She was very young for her 40 years. The blood of the elves was evident, and therefore, thanks to her unearthly beauty, Elena was considered the pinnacle of the imperial court and one of the main favorites of His Highness. Everyone around her sought her attention and approval. When one of the court girls asked if Elena had once replaced the girl's mother, she replied that after Simon's rescue, Kalia had been taken to the Duke's house, and she had been raising her ever since. Although the girl and Simon were once stubborn and disobedient, they did nothing wrong. The only thing that bothered them was the orphan girl's interest in martial arts. The friendship between Mr. Simon and Kadia is something that many people like to discuss, even when it gets into intimate territory and dirty innuendos begin. But no one has witnessed anything like this. Kalia thought back to the past. Although she lived in the Duke's palace, she was given a room in the far wing. However, not even a ray of sunlight reached there, and the conditions were worse than the servant's room. Before all this, the girl ate at the same table as the servant. Whatever her merits to the Duke's family, Elena did not allow her to have contact with a commoner and have close contacts with her. In order to be able to see Simon even outside the estate, Kalia had to ask Madame Elena for permission and constantly inform her about the purpose and results of the meeting with the Crown Prince. The girl didn't know in which other family it was customary to ask permission before meeting with her brother. Elena's position really angered Kalia, and she often wanted to tell her a lot of things so that she wouldn't overthink things. But over time, everyone realized that Madame's concern was only for the public. The girl who saved Simon achieved everything on her own. She only thanked the Duke for giving her an appendage, so it was worth just ignoring all of Elena's intrigues and tricks. After all, that was the only way she could express herself behind closed doors. So now she promised to go to the lady's house later and visit her and talk. But Elena still wanted to ask about what was going on between the girl and Simon. Madame didn't want to let her go for a long time, but simply asked about life, inadvertently moving on to Simon and his personal life. The court ladies were not very fond of Lady Elena. After all, everyone could afford lace and beautiful dresses, but it was absolutely impossible for her jewelry to be more beautiful than the ladies'. Even the biggest rebels of secular society paled before Elena and were afraid to say something in their defense or to somehow express themselves, and if the lady cried, everyone around her also began to sob. Prince Lyman Rojas was working in his office. His brother suddenly opened the window and let in a strong wind, scattering letters and documents all over the room. The Crown Prince had asked him not to do that. Lyman asked his brother to immediately collect the documents and not do anything like that again. State affairs cannot be delayed by such nonsense from a boy who now only wants to have fun and fool around. Simon snapped his fingers, and the papers began to fold into a neat column of their own accord. It seemed to Lyman to be the most shameless waste of a magical gift. It was hard to imagine what other magicians thought. The prince told his brother that Kalia was hurrying here. He was not very happy about this news. Therefore, he said that it would be better for the tyrant to direct his strength and energy to making the existence of his people, who were suffering, easier. But the prince could not understand why his commander-in-chief had decided to come to the palace on her only day off. She was not distinguished by her desire to visit the ruler and the palace simply for fun. Simon said that the girl just wanted to see one of them, so now they would find out who Kalia was rushing to see. A smile spread across his face as he realized that his friend had come to see him. The prince, meanwhile, thought that his brother was afraid to confess his feelings to the girl. But it was clear that something had happened between them that evening, when they celebrated the day of Kalia's victory in the war. It was useless to hide it. From that evening on, Simon had been strangely excited about the girl. He avoided talking about her, but everyone knew it was a farce, and he wanted to share it with someone. But the strangest thing happened when he met Kalia in person. He was embarrassed. It was difficult for him to say anything in her presence. But the girl, in contrast to him, had a normal appearance and held on for several months. Simon said that the girl was dressed in her official uniform, so she must be going to His Highness. Lyman replied that he would not really like his office to become a place for secret meetings. The prince's brother replied that he did not want to interfere in state affairs, so he would leave the office in order to leave Lyman and the commander-in-chief alone. After all, they had more important matters to attend to than simple visits. Simon promised that he would not use the door to leave the room. He admitted that he did not want to meet the girl now, and the prince would have to tell him everything later in person. Lyman asked if he was really going to disrespect the future ruler in front of everyone. Simon replied that he loved his brother very much, but was not ready to talk to Kalia right now. The prince stood on the balcony and looked at the place where his little brother used to be. Although he sometimes behaved very badly, the prince only got his place thanks to his brother and the efforts of Kalia herself, for which he was grateful. The prince understood perfectly well that for the future of the empire, he needed to cultivate people like Simon and Kalia. They were the bulwark of the state in the last war with Rojas's opponents, so he tolerated reconnaissance. If Lyman once devoted himself entirely to the empire and the development of the state, Simon similarly put his soul into Kalia. From his childhood, he constantly stood up for her and protected her from all kinds of encroachments, and no one could surpass Simon's feelings for Kalia. The prince knew that for sure. His brother was just sometimes afraid to admit it, but if he did, he would finally get peace of mind and relief. Kalia entered the office. She placed her hand on her heart and greeted her ruler. The girl was afraid to behave informally in the presence of the ruler. The prince invited her to come without formalities because today was a day off. The girl stood opposite the prince and finally said that she had come today to ask for his resignation. This news made the prince very sad. He did not want to believe what he had heard. Lyman asked again. The prince asked if he had heard. After all, no one expected this from her. But Kalia assured him that he had heard everything correctly. She wanted the ruler to let her go quickly and give her what she wanted. The boy took the commander-in-chief by the hand and asked what had happened to her and why she had suddenly decided to act in such a way. The girl replied that she just wanted to rest. Laimad hinted at a vacation. So the prince asked where the girl wanted to go on vacation. He was ready to order a carriage right now and send her wherever she wanted. Lyman asked if Simon was to blame for this and if he was involved in it. However, Kalia replied that the boy had no business here, although many people said that they had been constantly at odds lately. In fact, the girl knew about her future and did not want problems. Kalia understood perfectly well the consequences of telling about the child she had conceived with Simon. She also told him that she wanted time to live in peace. Her services to the state allowed her to do so. The girl also added that she could return at any time if the prince summoned her at a time when the state was suffering and required her help. But she was still forced to leave for a long time. Before Lyman that she would not leave or betray the country under any circumstances. The prince did not try to accuse her of this. He did not even mentally allow her to betray or escape. Kalia replied that serious reasons forced her to take such a step, but she definitely won't be able to tell everything in detail. But at the first call, she is ready to return to the ranks of soldiers and defenders in the near future. But she mentioned the possibility of her having a family. The prince didn't know how to react to such a message from his main strike force, but he simply had no other choice at the moment. Finally, she left the office, and she realized that the days were getting shorter and the rainy season was about to begin. This time was devastating for the state, so it was worth getting things in order before then and being safe. For 2 or 3 weeks, the sky becomes overcast and it starts to rain. It continues unabated, and natural disasters begin. The Ministry of Magic provides the population with all possible assistance and saves tens of thousands of residents. Well, this is a very difficult time for all people. So we need to leave Rojas's lands before the rainy season. At the same time, we need to take care of some things and talk to Simon about what happened. She saw Simon in the park. The girl had only one question in her mind: how could this have happened that evening? It was probably the alcohol and the amount they had consumed at that time that was to blame. But the girl came to the conclusion that there was no point in thinking about it now. The reasons were no longer important. It was worth thinking about how to live with it. That evening was an evening of triumph and victory over enemies, a celebration of life. Everyone present said that the naval battle was the final stage of the war, and the impudent pirates were punished. General Kalia herself led the operation, and the victory was entirely her merit before the people and the state. Just 1 year of fierce fighting under her leadership led to Rojas's victory on land and sea, something everyone expected from a girl who had ended a war that had lasted nearly 7 years before her intervention. Simon called the girl after him. He asked why she was drinking so much alcohol today. After all, you need to be in moderation and control yourself. Kalia replied that she just wanted to relax. The girl was in a good mood. Simon handed her a glass with something unknown in it. Kalia thought that the boy had been very kind to her, but his words emanated a coldness, and he could do nothing about it. Kalia told her friend that he was acting strangely today. He replied that in that case she was just a thorn in his side, but she assured him that wasting magic on his pranks was a waste of time. Simon asked her to confide in him. After all, he had a surprise for his friend. She had to follow him and see it with her own eyes. Kalia couldn't even imagine how it would end. The young man replied that it was her birthday today. Kalia said that he was the only one who celebrated it on the day she joined the Duke's family. No one else knew about this tradition. Simon just smiled. The girl was surprised by his persistence. Sometimes it manifested itself in very strange things. This time he asked her to confide in him. After all, he had never done anything to harm her or annoy her in any way. The young man brought his girlfriend to the top floor of the magic tower, where his laboratory and office for magical research were located, and where he practiced various kinds of magic. Simon gave the girl scrolls. He did this every birthday, and Kalia knew he was as consistent as anyone. But the boy called her a fool. He also talked about the magical possibilities of the scrolls. One of them helped to hide one's tracks for a long time. Another gave the owner the ability to teleport to any place he could think of. And the last one could even cure serious illnesses. Kalia asked if her friend had stolen them from the magical archives of the imperial court, but Simon assured her that he had created them with his own hands, and no one but the girl would be able to use them. The young man was very handsome at that moment. Kalia understood why the court ladies spoke so of her named brother. He added that another scroll allowed him to be summoned personally to any place of his residence. This artifact had no expiration date or any limitations. It was enough to simply interrupt it in half and call Simon, and he would arrive literally in a few seconds. These were the abilities that the Archmage possessed. The guy looked into his girlfriend's eyes and said that he would come to her call even to the other side of the continent. Nothing could stop him. A romantic atmosphere spread in the room, and the young man understood it. Kalia herself did not understand, or refused to understand, what was to happen in the near future in this room. The boy understood this and called her a turkey. She asked what he meant. Simon said that nothing had happened and he didn't want to tell her anything. He could have talked to a brick or a wall with such success. He also thought about how vain he had been in hoping for something. For the past 5 years, Simon had been making vague hints about his feelings for the girl, but she had remained deaf to them. For General Kalia, there was only the battlefield and a sword to fight the enemy. The girl saw that Simon was angry. She knew perfectly well that it was not worth touching him in such a state, although in her opinion he behaved rudely and offended her in some way. But Kalia did not want to spoil this evening. To begin with, it was worth climbing down from the magic tower and leaving the boy alone so that he had time to cool down and calm down. The girl came across a strange scroll that talked about the body and feelings for a person. The scroll described that when there are feelings, the body will let you know. It also talked about the author and the one who created this magical artifact to help people who were confused about themselves and their feelings. Derek, the author of the scroll, was very different from the other magicians. He was a close friend of Simon, and the young man tensed when he saw Kalia holding the scroll in her hands. Finally, the young man set out to take the artifact. He said that the girl must give back the scroll. After all, it is a very dangerous object, and therefore it must be given back quickly and put in its place. Simon, according to him, simply did not have time to hide the artifact. A playful mood took over the girl. She refused to give up the artifact, and instead offered to take it from her. She knew that Simon would not be able to do this, so she wanted to make him angry. But the boy didn't even move. Kalia asked why he was acting like that. Did he really want to fool around? Instead, he asked if she was interested in which scroll he had called dangerous and asked to return. When the girl asked what kind of scroll it was, Simon replied that it was thanks to it that one could find out whether a couple had any feelings for each other. And if a guy and a girl tore it up, then there would be love. The young man explained that if they had any feelings for each other, something irreparable could happen to both of them. Feelings would flood in, and the couple would give themselves to each other, and they would never be the same again. But Kalia's reaction was unexpected. She asked the guy to restrain himself in his fantasies and desires. After all, this was not a battlefield. There were certain boundaries and norms of behavior. She pretended that she was not interested. She added that his statements were sometimes too much. He replied that he didn't mean anything like that. He just wanted to explain everything as politely as possible to his beloved. The young man's appearance was somehow angry. Simon asked why she had turned red. Had his words really angered him so much? The girl was starting to get nervous, but it was hard to say what was more unnerving. It seemed that she liked Simon's words. He unfolded the parchment and said that this was only possible if both of them had feelings for each other. Without that, this scroll was just a piece of paper with ink on it, and nothing more. The young man stood opposite Kalia and asked if she thought it wasn't about the two of them. After all, in that case, she might not worry and calm down. The girl was silent, and this silence said a lot about the parchment. And Simon still asked if she was ready to do such a thing. After all, despite everything, General Kalia was also famous for being able to control magic of this level of influence on mentality. The young man provoked her. Kalia considered that she herself would be willing to try the scroll's effects, but she was more interested in how well she could resist its influence. Simon said that the general was actually an iron slug. The general was angry. She was used to the fact that the aforementioned brother often manipulated her in this way and mocked her, provoking her to sometimes thoughtless actions. But this time it was very risky to test fate. He often succeeded, but today was definitely not the case. She did not explain the reason, but some unknown fear for some reason made itself felt in the girl. Simon asked if it could be because she liked him. These words simply blew Kalik's mind away. His friend simply mocked her and tried to get her mad. He kept asking if she was in love with him, and therefore avoided this ordeal. The girl grabbed the scroll in anger and tore it in half. Energy swirled around, illuminating the room brightly. Simon didn't even have time to understand what had happened, but his guesses turned out to be correct. Kalia stared in amazement at the swirl of magical energy swirling in the air like a small whirlwind. The girl realized that she was overcome by an uncertain feeling that she had never felt before. But it all disappeared as suddenly as it had begun. The girl stood opposite Simon and asked him if he was happy now. After all, his plan had worked, the scroll had revealed nothing, so it was time to return to the guests. But suddenly she saw that the boy's body was enveloped in a pleasant light glow. The boy was looking at her carefully and noticed the girl's strange look. He asked what happened and why she was staring at him so hard. The thought that something intimate could happen right now, and the realization that intimacy was possible right now with Simon himself, somehow scared the girl. She quickly walked to the door and had no intention of staying. She had already jumped onto her horse when the magician tried to stop her. Kalia replied that she preferred to return to the estate, although Simon tried to shout something after her. The girl did not listen to him. Suddenly she changed her mind. The girl dismounted. She cursed Simon in her mind, but now for some reason she couldn't resist his charms. He seemed to her more and more attractive and unique. Kalia grabbed him by the shirt and in a commanding tone ordered him to immediately neutralize the effect of the magical artifact. He said it was impossible to do it right now, so he was powerless in this regard. The girl pulled him close and took him by the chin. Finally, they merged into a kiss. It was something incredible. Kalia realized that she would no longer be able to control herself and refrain from the irreparable. She continued to kiss him. The guy reciprocated because he had been waiting for this for a long time. Kalia assured through kisses that this was only his fault and the fault of the magical artifact, which could not be resisted. And then it happened that the great commander and General Rohasa became pregnant. Now, for some reason, she began to blame herself for weakness and frivolity. However, Kalia can't change anything now. She was nervous that in just one night of intimacy she was able to make a baby. And with a guy she had grown up with all her childhood and whom she considered to be like a brother, she felt like trash. Finally, they met Simon in the garden. The young man asked how long it had been since they had last seen each other. The girl replied that it had been about 2 weeks since their last meeting. The magician was surprised by such precision and tone. The young man said that the girl had been skillfully avoiding his company all this time, but he couldn't believe his ears. After all, right after that night, she had a fight with Simon and assured him that she was to blame for everything. He had chased her away. The next time they met, they were at the Duke's estate. There, the young man was telling his friend that the elders and members of his family were hinting at a wedding and its necessity for the birth of a future heir. Kalia misunderstood him then. She held out her hand to Simon and promised that no one would ever know what had happened between them, so his honor might not fear the appearance of a son from the outside. And now she thought that no matter how much time passed and what she did, she definitely wouldn't avoid his company. So Simon's accusations had no basis in fact from the very beginning. Meanwhile, the young man said that since the war ended, he had difficulty finding a girl to just talk to. Had the great commander of armies become proud and arrogant towards him? Suddenly and unexpectedly, he asked if it wasn't worth starting another war or skirmish now. After all, he was in the right mood right now, wanting to kill someone or destroy something and relax. The girl is tired of listening to the magician with a bad temper. She assures that the events of that day should not affect any of them, and so she promises that she will forget him and Simon will do the same. Kalia asked why such a powerful archmage could not resist the spell's influence on his mind and allowed something like this to happen. He replied that in his case, the spell and the scroll had no effect on him. He hinted that he was the supreme and strongest mage of Rojas, so for him, that scroll was just a toy. In fact, he wanted something like that with the girl. He had been longing for it for a long time, and he probably took the opportunity. Simon was still trying to be the one to guide the girl to the right thoughts. He said that the passion that day was not the result of the action of the scroll or magic. Then she wanted Simon, and he wanted to possess her. Kalia accused the boy of destroying the most precious thing between them, their long-standing friendship. The wizard became angry. He released a huge amount of energy into the air. Thus he burned down His Highness the Duke's garden again. Now he said that tomorrow he would leave the capital for 2 weeks to set up a magical protection for the lands of Rojas, so they would not see each other for a long time. The girl couldn't believe that Simon had only told her to return to this conversation after he returned from his hike. The importance of this topic would now haunt her and would deprive her of sleep. Simon asked her not to go anywhere until he returned, and Kalia asked him about how he felt about the children. He did not understand the reason for the question, and the girl reminded him that marriage was closely related to this. Stunned by the answer, the girl realized that she would never get the chance to admit that she was pregnant by Simon. After all, she had known his attitude towards children for a long time, so she had lost all hope. He explained that his talk of marriage did not mean he wanted to have children. Kalia wanted to shout right in the guy's face that she was carrying his child, so she was interested in the question. Simon left, and the girl was left with thoughts about her rightness when she decided not to tell about the child. In the future, she will look for a better way out of the situation with the pregnancy. The boy was in the palace at the time. He could not forget the image of Kalia. He was attracted by the girl's strong arms and her hair. The posture was strong and firm, which indicated all the events that the girl had overcome for today. The ladies in the palace, on the contrary, despise Kalia. The aristocrats, accustomed to spending their whole lives simply mocking someone while doing nothing themselves for the betterment of the state, called her the Iron Maiden. But Kalia paid no attention to their chatter and gossip about her person. The girl was above the intrigues and gossip that spread through the palace and lands of Rojas. The general was the favorite of the people. He was embarrassed by today's conversation about the child. They had touched on similar topics before, but tried to avoid them. But today the girl dared to openly ask about his plans for children. Simon held a small jewelry box in his hands, and he thought that even when Kalia, who was considered impenetrable in such matters, started talking about it, someone had told her the secret. The prince remembered the events that had taken place immediately after that evening when Simon and Kalia had been intimate. He had been thinking in front of the window that morning about what had happened yesterday and how their lives would turn out after that. Downstairs in the hall of the magic tower, a girl in a blue dress was waiting for him. She was holding a book in her hands, and she told Simon, whom she saw, that he had slept much longer today. She had almost finished reading the book. The girl was glad to see Simon. She replied that she had been waiting for him for too long today. However, their meeting was a real treasure for her. Meanwhile, the boy tried to strain his memory to remember who she was. At the ball, she was introduced to him as the third princess of Ains. But why she had waited for him and sat in the hall for so long was difficult for the young man to remember. The events of the evening could not fit into a logical sequence before his mind. Suddenly and unexpectedly, she announced that she had arrived at the great magician Simon Tellerin to offer him her hand and heart, which, under the circumstances, was a pretty good move. Simon asked for forgiveness, but he refused such an offer. Such a good morning was spoiled by the appearance of this girl and her inappropriate offers. He promised that he would pretend that nothing had happened. The princess did not wait. She screamed and asked if all this was really because of General Kalia. After all, such a turn of events threatens the princess with the loss of honor and dignity, so the anger was justified. The princess continued to say that Kalia had left very early this morning. It was not a very suitable hour for visiting simple friends, so obviously there had been something between them since the evening. The girl said that she was not going to continue to scold him for who he had once dated. After all, it was definitely not relevant now. Simon replied that he had to listen to all this. Nothing connected them. Ainsa said that he had once saved her during a fierce battle, and yesterday they had also had a rather pleasant conversation. In the Archmage's opinion, it still meant nothing, and this conversation would be empty. Young Mr. Turlone said that this was the end of their communication. After all, her visit to him was not very modest in this respect, so he did not even intend to pay her a visit. She would find her way on her own. The princess asked if he really wasn't interested in the question of why she had dared to come to him. Simon replied that he was only interested in Mrs. Kalia right now, and everything else would be simply unnecessary for him now. The Archmage had long been planning to confess his feelings for General Kalia. However, the war, which had lasted 7 years, did not allow him to do so. However, it was reassuring that it was they who brought victory. Rojas. It had also been more than 7 years since the young man realized that he loved his girlfriend more than anything. He was attracted to Kalia's manly manners, and Simon could only dream of the moment of confession. The prince came to visit the boy. He suggested that they rest and have a drink. For Simon, this behavior of the heir to the throne was strange, because it had never come to this. But now the magician wondered what was happening to Kalia. Simon suspected that the prince didn't really like the content of the conversation with the girl. But Lyman revealed that he had received an offer from the neighboring state, Nathan, to take one of the princesses in the place of the empress. The magician asked if the prince himself had not guessed that he would have to pay such a price for help in the war. So it was not news to him, it was simply a matter of time, and Lyman could refuse. Simon said he could come up with any number of excuses for his best friend to get out of an unwanted wedding, or, in the worst-case scenario, he would drive Nathan and his family insane. The prince refused. He did not want to tarnish the honorable name of his beloved cousin. He would somehow deal with this matter himself. Simon felt sorry for this kind and trusting young man who did everything honorably. Well, if Lyman himself is taking on the issue of the wedding, then now he should have told about the content of the conversation with General Kalia. Pritzen didn't want to touch on this topic, but he wouldn't just let it go. Lyman didn't want to tell the truth. After all, he foresaw that if Simon didn't like it, he could destroy the entire emperor's palace. In that case, it would be better not to tell the truth about Kalia. The prince said that if his brother was so interested in the girl, why didn't he shrink her down and carry her in his pocket? Simon liked the idea very much. Lyman saw the changes that had taken place in his friend. So this was another reminder that it was not worth talking about the conversation with Kalia right now. And the prince needed to control himself and his words better. Simon said that in that case, he would leave the prince. Finally, Lyman told his friend to be careful during his trip. This was said so sincerely that the magician himself did not suspect anything and forgot about the conversation with Kalia. The prince said that he would miss him without him. Kalia, meanwhile, spoke to the man she had tried to leave behind as commander of the order. The knight's name was Brooke Eucrea, and he was a vice, captain of the royal guard, but he considered himself unworthy. The girl was tired of this conversation. She had been nagging him about it for almost 3 days. Now she firmly ordered him to get up from his knees. But the man assured her that if the news reached the others, chaos would break out in the order. But what worried him most now was that the neighboring aggressor state might force preparations for a new attack and attack Rojas again. And without a great general, the army would not be able to cope. The girl replied that she did not believe that after her resignation, the empire would lose its military might and power. Moreover, he himself understood perfectly well that the enemy did not have the strength to attack again. Finally, the man asked for at least an official reason for his resignation. Kalia replied that these were personal reasons and no one should know about them. So Brooke had better start preparing for the reception of cases now. The man still believed that a person could not risk the state and the lives of thousands of people for personal interests. Kalia clenched her fist tightly, her bones cracked, and the future commander of the order fell silent. Kalia said that there was a good chance that she would return to the order. Brooke asked if it would happen in a year. The girl replied that she was not ready to give an exact date, so the conversation was over. The general told Brooke that if he tipped off anyone or revealed a secret before she officially announced it, he would get a good beating and a try. That's how strong her hand was. Kalia's personal squire entered the room to report that she had carried out her mistress's orders and had driven the carriage to the back exit of the palace. But the girl was surprised by something else entirely. She certainly didn't expect to see her lady in a very beautiful outfit, which the general had never worn before. The girl said that the dress emphasized Kalia's figure very well. The general praised the squire for his loyalty and speed in carrying out orders. If it weren't for the servants, she could have spent a lot of time on preparations, but now every minute was worth its weight in gold. Kalia thought about how lucky she was with this girl, and although the squire had lost her horn to the plague at a very young age, she remained bright and cheerful. It was worth arranging her future. The lady ordered the girl to be silent and not to tell anyone anything. Even if His Majesty the Emperor arrived, Hamming was to remain silent and say that she knew nothing about Kalia's mysterious departure. The girl replied that she would do everything that way. After all, she served the general, not the emperor. In return, Hamming asked if she would take her mistress with her on business trips and travels. She replied that she would not do without her. Kalia set off for the places where she was born and spent a lot of time. These areas seemed even poorer than they had been 8 years ago. The girl asked the squire to drop her off here. The scene of her saving Simon stood before her eyes. But before that, everything was like a fog. She had not been able to remember the events up to that moment for many years. She wondered how she had survived in such conditions. The squire distracted them from their thoughts. She informed them that if they lingered in this place for a little longer, they would not reach their final destination. And that simply could not be allowed. They had to make it. In the diner, the girl and her mistress looked at the boy sitting next to them at the table. He was drawing something. The general thought that such a child was now being conceived in her. Kalia would be happy regardless, boy or girl. A woman approached Kalia. She asked her to forgive her son for disturbing her with his presence. It's just that only in this room can he sit quietly and draw, as she had ordered him to do. The general replied that everything was fine. The woman took their order and asked if she and Kalia had met before. After all, her face seemed very familiar, and she replied that they had hardly met before. Finally, when Humming and Kalia had satisfied their first hunger, the girl asked the hostess who they should expect here and to whom the lady was in such a hurry. Kalia remained mysteriously silent and kept the mystery and intrigue. Suddenly, Kalia asked if the little one could draw her in exchange for a piece of lemon pie. Humming was surprised, and the little one would have liked to do it, but his mother had told him not to pick on guests and customers. The general continued. She said that she had actually come here on business. Her occupation was to collect paintings and search for young artists who would give hope for a bright and famous future. Finally, he showed a drawing of Kalia. The girl liked the drawing very much. She offered the first payment, a huge piece of lemon pie. The general said that he had talent. A stranger attacked the owner of the establishment. He demanded a drink for himself and did not listen to the poor, frightened woman, who explained once again that her establishment did not sell alcohol or liquor at all. The woman said that she would immediately call for help from the soldiers from the local garrison. However, the attacker did not consider it necessary to react to these words. He said that he would deal with her in the meantime. The stranger's friends asked, "Do the owners want problems, or do they want to be closed for a long time?" A man with glasses and a ponytail asked the strangers to stop and get out. The group of strangers continued to mock the owner. A man with a tail approached the criminals. He was going to talk to them and discuss the details of the conditions for them to leave the establishment. But no one listened to him. One of the guards kicked him, and the stranger fell to the floor, dropping his bag. The attackers introduced themselves as the Storm Wolves Guild and threatened him. Kalia intervened. She grabbed the attacker by the hand. He did not expect resistance from them and asked who she was that dared to interfere in his conversation and the upbringing of ungrateful people and inhospitable hosts. When everything calmed down, the pack of wolves dispersed. The general stood in a circle between them. Everyone around was surprised and asked who this mysterious stranger was. It turned out that the rich girl was not afraid of criminals. The Posipaki decided to deal with this stranger and teach her a lesson. Kalia thought that public safety was at a very weak level, so it was worth checking in with them later. A few minutes later, the attackers were lying on the ground, beaten and embarrassed. Kalia, meanwhile, asked them not to touch the owner of the establishment again and to think before opening their mouths and speaking thoughtlessly. Finally, when she had dealt with the attackers, she ordered the garrison to be called in. The mistress didn't even know what to do next. He was still trying to do something, but the girl was already on top of him. At this, Kalia suggested that they leave, as it would be a long time before the soldiers arrived. but she felt sorry for the attackers only because there was a child in the hall, and it was not right for a child to see such things and witness violence. The little one ran to his mother. He was glad that nothing had happened to her, and the girl had stood up for her. The woman herself did not want her son to see something like that. But what happened, happened. Both cried and rejoiced. But Kalia, meanwhile, thought about what she had done wrong with these attackers. She should have immediately beaten them and thrown them out of the establishment, taking revenge for insulting the woman in front of her son. The owner of the establishment thanked the girl and said that from now on she would be attentive to such issues and would request permission from the garrison to have her establishment much better guarded. But she was more concerned about the doctor. The doctor turned out to be the young man with the ponytail who had suffered at the hands of the attackers. The woman explained that she had met the doctor who had informed her about a scheduled meeting with his patient at this particular institution. Finally, Kalia turned to the little boy who had drawn the picture. She said that in order to protect his mother from similar situations in the future, he must become either strong or smart. She looked at the criminal carefully and told him how to become strong, but then she put her hand on the boy's head and stroked it. The advice was to join the guard, and at the checkpoint he could call Josiah Terabin. The mother listened to the guest. The stranger's words and behavior made her very embarrassed, and giving out such advice was generally unacceptable and not easy. And the client does it as if it were important, with a bang. The boy realized that from the moment he joined the guards, his life would change dramatically. He also realized that he wouldn't be able to be with his mother often, but he still asked her to let him try. The woman patted her son on the head. She said that she would finish her business now and personally take him there. She wanted a bright future for her son, and Kalia assured her that she would put in a word for the boy. The child's mother rushes over and hugs Kalia. She is very grateful for what the stranger has done for her. After all, despite the fact that she protected him from criminals and saved their lives, she will place the little one in an educational institution. Finally, the woman asked the general if she would give her name. Kalia said that she was very grateful for such respect, but it was not worth making their acquaintance public. The owner did not insist on her point. Kalia only warned that if Clark did not study and missed classes, he would be expelled without the right to reinstate. Entering and studying at the Guard Academy is an adult act. Evening has come. Alan Magicker, the doctor, went to Mrs. Kalia. He asked, "Is she ready for the examination?" She replied that she would just move her things. But the doctor protested. Even Kalia had to take care of herself. Pregnancy at her term was very important, and from now on, when Alan becomes her personal doctor, he will constantly monitor her. The general is satisfied. The doctor is as she was described and told about him. An acquaintance recommended Kalia as a doctor to her brother. He was a bit grumpy and irritable, but at the same time he took his duties and vocation very seriously. The reason for this attitude towards pregnancy was the events of his past. It was then, 6 years ago, that he lost his wife, who was pregnant, and the doctor who treated her could do nothing to save her. Alan looked at the girl's things and asked if this was all her luggage. If so, he would carry them to her room himself. It was clear that this man was very responsible and would diligently help his client. Kalia asked him to take it easier, but he replied that every moment of her pregnancy was important. You can't overload your body and do at least something. You should be more attentive to yourself. The girl asked if Alan thought she was just sick and not pregnant, to which the doctor assured her that she was not, and a pregnant woman is just as fragile as a newborn baby, so she shouldn't worry. Kalia asked her squire to leave her here and go to the capital, where she would have the opportunity to find a better mentor. But Haman refused such an offer. The general says that in the near future he will live in a remote village, where he will not even be able to draw his sword. However, the faithful servant promised to always be by her side and help her in everything. So Kalia agreed. At the very end, the girl gives an order to the butler. He was to deliver a letter to Simon in which the general asked his friend not to try to find her, but to give her some time to be alone. Only he would know about it. The prince watched Kalia leave through the window. He considered himself a young man, because he had persuaded the girl not to leave her post as commander-in-chief of the armies, but simply to take a leave of absence for a certain period of time. Simon would not be angry. Already in the carriage, Kalia explained to the servants that they would not be traveling in the usual way. The general was going to use magic to cover her tracks, so outside the city, they would simply be transported. Haman was scared, but she didn't have time to understand anything. After all, the girl saw the sea in front of her. This landscape struck her to the depths of her soul. Kalia could only guess about the squire's true feelings. The ladies in the seaside town were discussing a rare pink mother of pearl. This piece of jewelry was unique in its kind, and therefore very valuable. And finally, yesterday, it was sold at auction for a staggering sum. Meanwhile, the doctor was sitting in the carriage in the baggage compartment. He was asking his new client how much longer it was until they finally arrived at their new home, because he was losing patience. But what angered him even more was that they had been moving around with the help of magic all this time. It was dangerous for Kalia herself, and he was tired of staying outside the crew on such journeys, and a pregnant woman shouldn't do that. Kalia reassured the doctor, saying that she had used the magic scrolls about 10 times in a row before. The number really surprised him. After all, something like this requires a lot of endurance and willpower. The general could no longer hear the women's conversation, and they came to the most interesting part. One of them was telling how Simon had bought a piece of jewelry that cost a small kingdom for Mrs. Kalia and had wrapped it up nicely. But many disagreed with the woman who told this news. Her interlocutors asked if it was true, or if she just wanted to believe in something like that. She simply remained silent, offended by the distrust from her friends. Finally, Kalia's carriage arrived at the right place. Hammond said that she was in a daze. Alan assured that the reason was the large amount of mana in the environment around the general, and this negatively affected the squire. The doctor, meanwhile, was studying the map. He confirmed the lady's suspicions that there must be a town nearby, and it was the ancient small settlement of Adiko. It was very quiet and peaceful there. If they hurry, they can reach him today. Kalia asked the squire anxiously if she could withstand a few more moves with the magic scroll. The girl assured her that she could. On the way, they saw a huge tree where children were playing. It was late at night, so it was strange that the children were still outside. Hammond liked the view. The doctor assured him that it was a very beautiful place. At last they arrived at the hotel where they would be staying for the first time. Alan reported this. He ordered the lady to go at once and rest after the journey, while he would arrange matters with accommodation and luggage, and then come. Kalia couldn't sleep for a long time. She was tormented by thoughts of Simon. He was supposed to return from a business trip tomorrow. The young man asked her to wait for him because he had a very serious conversation with her, and she did so. But in reality, the girl was trying to reassure herself that it was a good and right choice. She simply had to go to that place. There was simply no other option, so it's worth just acting according to the plan. Thoughts swirled in her head about why her boyfriend didn't like children so much, and what he would say if the girl directly told him that he was the father of her child. There were few options, and they all came down to abortion. Such thoughts, even though they were just fantasies and empty assumptions, made Kalia very angry. For some reason, she wanted to look the bastard in the eye and ask how he could treat his own child like that. The general got out of bed. She held her stomach and tried to calm herself. After all, she couldn't be too nervous now when a new life was emerging inside her. Alan wouldn't be happy about this. The girl went out into the garden. It was very beautiful there, and as it turned out, there was that tree nearby with the children. She was surprised that they were still walking. And she was also surprised by the mysterious, bright glow around the tree and the little ones on it. When the children called her a half-elf, the general began to guess. She asked the children, surprised and delighted, if they were really Felty, or if she was just dreaming. They were delighted. They said that this girl was unique in that she not only saw them, but even heard and could communicate with them. It had been a long time since they had met someone who could communicate with them so freely. Questions rained down on the general. Fetra was curious about who she was and where she came from. And where did she get this unique gift of seeing what was not given to other people and creatures to perceive? Kalia could not answer for sure. Simon had been telling the girl about this people for a long time, but she thought it was more of a fabrication and fantasy. However, according to her friend, the fairy empire occupied about 20% of the continent, and on their land almost no human foot has set foot. These creatures do not really like to contact people and be around them. Perhaps the fickle nature of humans is not very pleasing to these magical creatures. With the help of a magical barrier and a huge tree, these magicians prevented ordinary people from visiting their domain. Only a few, and then by chance, could visit this amazing land. There were often cases when some of the Feltry tried to live in the human world undercover, but these were rare cases. Kalia was a person of extraordinary talents, but she had met the Feltry for the first time. One of the children, who were mostly boys, asked if it was because she was pregnant, and her psychic abilities made it highly likely that the child would also be an unusual person. The general asked how they knew about her pregnancy. They replied that they could see small children even when they were still in the womb, and children can often see them, but adults do not believe their stories. The children came down from the tree and stood in front of Kalia. They began to discuss her child. As a group, they came to the conclusion that this child was not ordinary. They said that it was the first time they had seen such a beautiful child. According to the magical beings, every little child radiates a radiance. Right now, Kalia is carrying a child who is very beautiful. She is not going to become someone ordinary and ordinary. The future of the child of a prominent general and a powerful magician simply could not be ordinary and mundane. The words of the Felt in this case should have been taken as a prophecy, but Kaoya wondered if she would want that. She would have preferred for the child to be born normal and live a simple, happy life, without unnecessary life challenges. The boys noticed the girl's changed mood and asked what had happened. The Felts were afraid that they had upset the girl, and at the same time they had done something bad to the child. They offered to give the Felts due, but Kalia refused. It was a very valuable magical artifact made from the tears of creatures. The girl gently took her face in her felt hands and said that she was much stronger than she seemed from the outside, and she thanked them for their concern and assured them that she was glad to meet them, and she hoped that this would not be the last meeting. Kalia's behavior deeply moved the Feltry. They wanted to hug this strange girl before saying goodbye. All four of them hugged each other tightly and pressed themselves against each other. The Feltry had rarely seen such a kind person. Kalia said that it was time for her to go back, but tomorrow before leaving she would definitely visit them again. They were certainly happy that she would visit them again. The children liked the girl and they prepared a gift. When she left, the children gathered to discuss today's guest. One of them said that the glow did not come only from the child. The mother herself was a powerful source of the glow. Kalia might not have been human. In the morning, the general came to the Felt to talk to them, but to her surprise, she found no one. Perhaps they were still asleep, but Kalia did not want to wake them and disturb them. Finally, she saw a small bottle under the tree. It shone from the inside. Kalia guessed that inside was Felty dew. So the girl thanked him mentally for the precious gift to her and the child. Kalia realized that the tree seemed ready to talk to her, so she left the morning cookies at its roots so that the tree would pass on the sweetness to Felt. And at the same time, she asked him not to tell anyone about her. At the hotel window, the general noticed a strange woman watching her intently, even though she pretended to be drinking champagne from a tall glass. Kalia wondered who this stranger could be and what had so intrigued the general. It seemed to the stranger that Kalia was talking to a tree. However, it could just be an illusion, or the girl could be crazy, and it just seemed to her at first glance. However, she pulled the guest away from her thoughts. A white-haired girl, who looked like an elf, entered the room. The stranger pulled her close to him. She promised that she would not hurt her. She ordered the elf to look at the tree and look like a felt tree on it. When the poor red-haired captive replied that she couldn't see anything, the stranger firmly squeezed the girl's chin with her hands and asked if Melina's treatment was really a waste of energy in that case. The dark energy broke out and attacked the tree in which the Felts were resting. It whipped the plant hard, and finally it became clear that some children were hiding in the crown of the mighty tree. The Felts could not resist. Kalia, meanwhile, was riding in the carriage. She felt that something had happened to the powerful protector of the world of magical creatures. But she was not going to tell anyone about her encounter with them. Humming saw concern. For some reason, the girl remembered a trip to the neighboring kingdom of Akan. Wang was famous for its medical preparations, so merchants often visited there to purchase field medicine for the military. It was there that she met the prince of this state. He resembled the stranger she had seen in the hotel window. Due to the fatigue from the sleepless night, she did not immediately guess whether it was a man or a young man. The prince of a neighboring state was named Worf, Adio. The last meeting went quite well, although the impression he made was not very pleasant. The boy then asked if it was her efforts that led to the rise of the Rojas Empire. He wanted to touch the girl, but she ordered him to stop and do nothing more. Kalia warned him that she was not used to being someone's toy, and next time she would simply slit his wrists and cut off his hand. The prince was clearly toying with her. He asked if his behavior was so disgusting that the great general was trying to avoid his company, and Worf himself was not averse to continuing the conversation with her and moving on to a closer relationship. Surrounded by Kalia's guards, the prince asked if she was really that sensual everywhere. If so, his cherished dream became the desire to undress the girl personally and explore her body without haste and enjoy it. The conversation was interrupted by the intervention of one of the magicians. A bolt of lightning flashed behind His Highness the Prince. This was magic of the highest order, and fortunately one of the guards had time to react. He protected Kalia and the prince. The girl guessed that it was Simon's magic. Only he could use something like that from a distance of thousands of miles, and only he could intervene and kill the vile things of the prince, whom he was ready to kill. Kalia asked to stop. The squire asked not to delay because they had to make it to the next hotel in time, and the last point of the magical transfer would soon be. But the general was not going to stop. She ordered him to step out of the carriage for a few minutes, as she had to personally convey to Brooke secret information regarding the order. The information concerned the prince and his presence in the lands of Rojas. When she activated the magic, the face of a frightened Brooke appeared before her. He reported that after the sudden disappearance of Lady Kalia, Simon had raised the entire palace to his feet and was searching for her with all his might. The aide explained that Sir Simon had not been out since last night. He had arrived yesterday morning, visited the prince, and had gone straight to the general's palace. When he did not find Kalia, he was very upset. Brooke told of Simon's threats to destroy the entire palace and everything around it if no one told him soon where Lady Kalia had gone and who was accompanying her. He had been unable to trace her. But the general stopped the flow of panicked speech. She said that before that, one case would need to be investigated. She explained that everything related to Prince Arkan. At the moment, he was in Antic. So Brooke had to independently and personally report that the prince of a neighboring state was currently in Rojas's lands. And if he had not come on a visit, then this was very suspicious. The prince had to know about this fact. And finally, she told him that they couldn't talk about their conversation to Sir Simon. Brooke asked what he should do if he used mind control magic on him. The girl assured him that it wouldn't come to that. Kalia was sure that Simon would be afraid to use control magic now. After all, he didn't control himself and his power. In that case, he could destroy the person he was working on. The general was still trying to convince herself that she and Simon were just friends. But the fact that he had burned down the emperor's garden and nearly destroyed his residence last time proved otherwise. But something was bothering Lady Kalia. She summoned Brick again. The girl ordered the assistant to inform Sir Simon that she was supposedly in Antica now. In this way, she would deal with the lasso. After that, Kalia ordered to immediately rush to their destination. Her travelers said that it was too much for one day, and they were very tired. Kalia announced that she would personally lead the crew. They had been traveling for 2 days. The general hadn't even rested. She was trying to distract herself from Simon's pursuit as much as possible, and she had to avoid meeting him at all costs. Alan and Humming didn't understand this. Finally, the girl decided to give her companions a rest. She said that they would stop at an inn. Kalia showed her tired friends to the hostess and asked to stay for the night. After dinner and the baptism, Kalia was examined by a doctor. He said that despite the stress and fatigue, the fetus was developing very well and the child had no developmental problems. Not much time had passed, and the baby was already big. But since the girl was famous for her good health, Kalia should take more care of herself. It's worth resting after such a long transition. And everything a woman sees or reacts to, her child sees. Kalia wondered if Simon would be able to find those children in the tree. He would definitely see them, because the elven blood would help him with this. A magician of this level would protect the Felts from enemy attacks. It was the fact that the child had Simon's blood flowing in his veins that allowed her to see the children on the magic tree. It was also surprising that since she had left the lands of Rojas, her friend had occupied her thoughts more and more. The cub began to push. The mother said that she really loved Simon very much, but only as a loyal companion and friend. Brother and sister should not hurt each other, which is why she left the estate. Now, for some reason, the memories of that night overwhelmed her. Only in the kiss was she the initiator. Everything else was done by Simon. But that didn't make it any easier. It was impossible to let everything go on the brakes. But images were already filling her mind. What they were doing on the desk in the office with that rope was something extraordinary. Simon and Kalia didn't give each other a minute's rest. The girl felt embarrassed by the hot memories. She thought it would be appropriate to go out for a walk and breathe in the fresh night air. No one here should prevent her from relaxing and enjoying the peace. Meanwhile, many miles from Kalia, Simon had already studied the magical tree. He realized that it could not be restored. Magic would not help in this case. The plant needed time and very good soil. But there was another matter in Antica that he was currently carrying out. Kalia had left a letter for his comrade. Simon had already looked through it and reread it once again. The general had written about the intertwined fate of the Duke's son and her own. But now she has disappeared so that she can have time to think and not burden Simon with unnecessary talk. There is no need to blame yourself and waste energy looking for her. In time, she will definitely return. The girl apologized for giving in to his advances that night, but when she returned, he would be truly surprised and pleasantly surprised by who she would bring with her. Simon's attention shifted back to the tree. There he saw that the protective aura had once again appeared around the magical oak. There, under its protection, sat a group of children who needed his help. They looked frightened. The boy saw that the tree had been split in half by lightning, but none of the magicians he knew used such magic and would not dare to use it in a populated area. When Simon finally decided to track down the attacker, the trail led him to a room that still contained the remnants of the magical energy and mana of the sorcerer who had attacked the felt tree. The young man realized that it was not Kalia. The Archmage's skills allowed him to follow traces of magical energy to open portals that had recently been used or closed. At the other end of the teleporter, he found an unconscious elf-like creature. Simon called his assistant for the coordinates and ordered him to remove the body from the scene. After that, the young man decided to continue following the footsteps of the person who left the helpless victim to die. In one of the trees, he heard someone tell him that he had the same glow. When Simon looked around, he saw a group of boys in the tree. They were looking at him carefully, but there was no hostility. The boy asked the Felt if they had seen a girl named Kalia. He described her appearance in detail. The elves said that he had an aura like that beautiful person. Simon understood that they were talking about Kalia. Alan stood in the doorway of the house. Kalia didn't immediately recognize him with his hair down. The girl didn't immediately realize that the young man was behaving strangely. He kept saying something and walking as if he were still asleep. The general guessed that he was a dreamer. It was worth stopping him, because in this state he had difficulty navigating his surroundings. The girl hugged him and listened to what he was saying. He called a certain Nadia. Later, Kalia realized that this was the name of Alan's late wife. He regretted that he could not save her, and he often blamed himself for it. But it was worth finishing it. Kalia shook him. When the young man came to himself, he felt embarrassed. The doctor justified himself by saying that when he gets very tired, he is unable to control anything around him and begins to sleepwalk. And now it happened. Finally, when the doctor calmed down and stopped apologizing, the girl told him that he had called a certain Nadia. Probably, asked Kalia, that was his wife's name. The doctor thought and agreed. He didn't want to touch on this topic. The pain of loss still hadn't let him go. And the feeling of guilt sometimes flooded his soul to the very edge, and at such moments he didn't even want to live without his lost beloved anymore. Even now, the thought of her makes his heart feel empty. Various thoughts haunted him during this time, but something kept him from taking his own life. But Alan controlled himself. Kalia got pregnant from her lover, and what emotions she feels now when she thinks about all this. The girl replied that it is very difficult to say unequivocally about her feelings for the child's father. But the young man replied that you could read the girl's true feelings on her face. She felt something for the man who would become the father of her child, even though everyone around her called her the Iron Maiden and was afraid of her. Alan also asked why she decided to give birth alone. The general said she didn't want to tell anyone, but when her personal doctor asked about it, she had to reveal the truth about her intentions. She was worried that this child, who for her was a miracle and a manifestation of the higher power's inclination towards her, would not have such an important meaning for the young man who would become her father. Kalia wanted the child to grow up in love. Alan assured the general that everything would work out and the child's father would definitely love her. But for this to happen, efforts had to be made to ensure that the baby was born healthy and without any developmental defects. In the morning, the hostess treated Kalia to a light breakfast. The woman told the guests that her mother often fed her something like this when she was pregnant and had severe toxicosis. But birth is happiness. The hostess asked what had happened in her guest's family, that a pregnant woman was forced to travel accompanied by her brother and sister. Kalia herself had invented this legend in order to hide her tracks from Simon. The girl told a sad story about her husband from whom she decided to run away. The reason was his addiction to drinking and gambling, which brought a lot of grief to the family. He also sometimes beat her. But when it got to the point where he started taking girls, the poor thing couldn't take it anymore. Her patience ran out and she decided to run away with her family, who also lived in the same house with her husband. The landlady was taken aback by the story. She thought that this sweet girl's husband was a real monster for treating her like that. The woman herself would have been ready to tear him to pieces for such treatment. Kalia said that it was all her own fault. After all, she had gotten married without even realizing what kind of person she was in front of. Hammond also began to cry quietly. Alan believed that these two were dying actresses of the big stage. The woman praised the guests for being such a close-knit family and supporting each other in a difficult time. Meanwhile, Kalia asked her not to tell anyone at all that she had seen them here and that they were visiting. Meanwhile, Simon was looking for the girl. He was grieving that she had left him, as if their relationship had never really mattered. Why had she left him without telling him the reason? Over the past 3 days that the young man had spent searching, he had the impression that he was about to go crazy. Despair and hopelessness had taken hold of him, forcing him to think negatively and lose hope for the future. The search was unsuccessful, and Simon, upset, went to the prince. The prince was just trying on new clothes for the gala evening. The arrival of his brother and the chief magician forced him to stop. He ordered them to be left alone. Lymond asked about the progress in the search for Kalia. At the same time, the prince saw how his comrade had weakened. It would be bad if Roxas lost such a powerful magician. Simon remained silent for now. He decided to tell about the corpse of an elf, which he found following the traces of a magic portal. But the magician told that one of the magicians of the enemy state had bought a fortress in the territory of Rojas and was engaged in strange deeds. And this stronghold was located near the mythical forest inhabited by Felts, who rarely come into contact with humans. But what was frightening was that the aristocrat, according to rumors, was engaged in collecting Felts. The problem was that the magical beings with whom the agreement had been made after a long confrontation could view the aristocrats' actions in Rojas's territory as a direct threat to their lives and systems. Then something happened that the prince had feared. Simon said that with his mind he could appreciate that the prince was hiding Kalia's whereabouts. However, his heart held a grudge against the monarch, so the magician would rest for a while. He would not be involved in the affairs of the empire, and although the magical order was supposed to be subordinate to the emperor and his family, the magical tower had always stood outside the ruling family's influence on the affairs of wizards. Simon said that all these years they had helped with magic and various artifacts only out of a deep sense of loyalty and patriotism, asking for almost nothing in return. And after Kalia's disappearance, their opinion changed. As for the young man's loyalty, the object of his loyalty was now outside this room. The prince himself was to blame for this situation, so he had only himself to blame. Lamond asked him to forgive him once again. He was even ready to give Kalia's first sword to his friend, but he replied that an apology would not change anything. It was not a spell that would take him back to the past. Simon was very angry with the prince. He not only hid Kalia's resignation, but also did not dissuade his friend from going on a business trip. Now the young man would only be busy searching for his beloved and nothing else. By evening, all his subjects in the magic tower were busy searching for Kalia or girls who would fit the criteria. The work was complicated by the fact that the girl used magical artifacts. But at the same time, his subordinates were searching for creatures resembling elves. It was necessary to investigate this case in parallel. After all, Kalia was not supposed to return home to lead a new war in troops. The man reported that the corpse's body structure was even more similar to that of the bathhouse. But this is not accurate, because in fact the larger one had a heavier structure. She also had unknown traces of magic on her body. It could also mean that she hadn't learned to control her magical energy. This surprised Simon, because elves were born with the ability to use magic. It was their natural skill. But after a closer examination, Simon agreed with his assistant. It seemed that the energy had been deliberately placed in the elf's body, and the poor creature couldn't handle such volumes. No one could give a definite conclusion on this matter. Finally, one of the magicians, whose name was Theon, dared to report his guesses that this creature was a chimera, that is, artificially created. Kalia thought about the last time she had been in the village with Simon. At that time, they could not even imagine that the girl would return here pregnant. Her thoughts turned to philosophical reflections on life. Lua was a beautiful city in the south of the empire. It was here that the general wished to give birth and spend time in peace and harmony. The population was not numerous, and therefore everyone was now discussing the newly arrived girl. Kalia came up with a legend about returning to this place after her husband died, and she wanted to visit his former homeland. She liked it there so much that she stayed. The locals consider this decision their greatest happiness. From that moment on, the ominous attacks of ogres and goblins stopped. Kalia witnessed how the persecution of Simon began in the media. It seemed that the young man had given up on state affairs. In addition, the princess of a neighboring kingdom began to gossip in the press about Duke Simon's orientation towards men. The young man seemed to want to be written about everywhere and attract attention to himself, but bad fame was not his goal at all. Before that, he had almost destroyed another palace when he lost control of his anger. But even more surprising was the news that the great magician of the empire had spent 3 days in a coma. Thus, a huge amount of magical energy was released without control. It was very dangerous for the sorcerer. Releasing all the magical energy was equivalent to giving all the last of her blood to an ordinary person. Kalia didn't want to believe that the reason for all this was her disappearance and hiding from her friend. The girl was even pleased that Simon had taken the risk and left the shores completely in order to find his beloved. He was actually losing his mind when it came to her and their relationship. Pity began to envelop her. Kalia turned to the baby in her belly and said that his father had a bad temper, and he was also a weirdo. However, what you definitely shouldn't be afraid of is that in a difficult moment he might just leave. The general understood that she wouldn't just let go of Simon. He would be looking for her until the very end. In general, it resembled some kind of game, at the end of which Kalia and the child would be a surprise for Simon. Humming brought food to her mistress. The squire was very glad that her mistress's previous appetite had returned. The doctor often asked about the well-being of his ward, but now he had to go. Important matters required his absence for a while. Humming and her mistress received clear instructions from the doctor, and some of it concerned proper nutrition, and also a responsible attitude to climatic conditions. The girl and her squire were simply delighted with these lands, and there was a grand event ahead, a local fair and a festival of everything in the world. Many guests were to arrive in the town and give unforgettable emotions, but only Simon could disrupt the idyll that had developed around them. Kalia heard stories that the wizard visited the school of knights and guardsmen she had founded every day, and he also tried to be the center of attention at all times. One day, while walking on the street, a local man approached Kalia. The man realized that the young lady was pregnant and advised her to dress warmer, as it would soon become very cold in these parts. People immediately gathered around. Everyone offered their clothes or a heating pad for the dear mother-to-be. Pregnant women should take care of themselves and in no case overwork or overcool. Despite this, she was also given a huge supply of fresh fruits and vegetables. It was nice when people, even without knowing her personally and her merits, treated her like this. In general, the people were kind and responsive. Some time passed. It was the 5th month of pregnancy. Alan returned to his patient. He kept harping on the importance of prenatal education for the unborn child. It's worth staying positive if possible. The doctor often stayed with Kalia and talked about how she should spend more time on aesthetic activities. So now he was going to read a book to her. Doctors recommend listening to a male voice. The general replied that this only applied to the father's voice. However, Alan assured that he would also be suitable for this role. Just like her mother, she was ready to read the book aloud herself. The general spoke insistently. The doctor said goodnight and left the room. He immediately felt better. It was hard for him to hear the words that he was not the father. Recently, he had felt responsible for the life of the child in the general's stomach. The man could not let go of the past. The image of his wife appeared before his eyes more and more often. Despite all his efforts, he would never become a father, no matter how much he wanted to. Alan didn't want to be sad. He had tried all his life to make the memories of his wives bring him happiness and a sense of peace, despite the misfortune that had befallen them. So now he simply thanked Nadia. Kalia read a fairy tale to the child about a bear who became the most powerful after a cataclysm took away all the material values and objects from his comrades. And then he showed that nature had given them everything. The general promised that she would do everything necessary to ensure that her child had everything, and she would also follow all the necessary instructions to ensure that the child's health would not suffer. And now it was time to rest. Before going to bed, the girl always looked at Simon's photo. She missed him, but the choice was made. Kalia wanted their child to be a little like him and a little like her. The future will show her hopes. The girl had a dream. Simon asked her to conceive a child with him. His words and touches were very gentle. However, it turned out that she could really hear something like this from her friend only in a dream. The wizard had asked her to be with him, and now, when she was not with him, she should return to him. This was what his soul desired more than anything. Simon promised that soon he would begin to indulge himself like a little child. But it was strange for the girl to hear such a thing. Since childhood, he had been like a brother to her, but the girl was very pleased to feel the warmth of the man on her. Every cell of her body indicated that she was next to her beloved. The unpleasant feeling that this was just a dream did not let go of the girl. She wished that Simon could say something like this to her in real life, but it was almost on the verge of fantasy. She did not want to wake up. When she woke up in the morning, she considered herself a vile creature. She had dared to mock her body like that. Despite everything, she was not going to accept the fact that she would have nothing in return. The girl took hold of her stomach and talked to the child. She blamed everything on the hormones. Now she needed to take a walk to get the anxious thoughts out of her head. The first thing she did was visit the kitchen. Kalia went down to the kitchen and met the maid there. She asked why the lady woke up so early, to which the girl replied that it was all because of the nomads. They had arrived here for the festival and would be here for a long time. The woman said that they were actually very good people. However, it turned out that they didn't really like cities, as they were often kicked out because of their noise and love of loud parties and celebrations. The servant was preparing breakfast for Kalia. This woman could be trusted because, as the squire said, she had 5 children of her own, so she certainly wouldn't be able to harm the young lady's body. The girl asked the woman how she coped with the noise, to which the maid replied that she was just used to it. After all, sometimes it is so noisy in her house that the membranes in her ears can burst. Kalia asked the woman about the dream. She was interested in whether women in labor often saw something like this. The woman assured her that she really devoted a lot of time to her family, so she had such dreams very often and vividly. This was a common occurrence for women in their position. However, you shouldn't dwell on it and stop your thoughts on something like this. The girl felt embarrassed that she had said too much. However, she had no other choice. The woman only warned that during such dreams the uterus contracts, which is very dangerous for the unborn child, but Kalia did not consider herself a weakling. On the contrary, she was ready for anything. Although she wanted to live for a while under the guise of a charming and fragile girl who had come to the father's homeland to give birth, there should not have been any misunderstandings or suspicions about her. Alan examined the pregnant woman. He showed her an image of the fetus with the help of magic. The doctor was convinced that it was a boy. Kalia was very happy that she would have an heir and successor, a son. She only regretted that Simon could not see this happiness now, and lately she had begun to think about him less and less. The doctor added to everything that the little one would be big and very beautiful. The doctor asked her to breathe in and out slowly. It immediately became clear to him that he was dealing with a very stubborn, expectant mother, where mere words meant nothing to her, only a practical example. Alan warned that the baby was already big, and when the time comes to give birth, it will become even bigger. And such a size of the fetus can also pose a threat to the woman in labor. Therefore, you should not get too carried away. The doctor warned that despite her physical endurance and pain tolerance, the girl would not be able to give birth safely if she did not follow his advice. And Alan was not going to risk her life again. And to top it all off, the woman herself had gained tens of extra pounds. So for everything to go smoothly, you need to listen to your doctor and do everything exactly as he recommends. Alan forbade his ward to eat sweets. Hamming also received appropriate instructions. So for Kalia, hard times will soon come. But for the festival, the permission will be relaxed a little so that she can have time to rest. In between inspections and sitting at home, Kalia and the squire would walk around the area. Once, Humming asked the landlady to go with her to the outskirts of the town, where, according to legend, elves lived. Alan asked if they would get there since the area was always closed to people. The girl thought that during the festival, the gates to that place were opened under guard. The doctor asked his ward if she often went on such holidays. She replied that she usually fought in foreign lands and conquered enemies. There was no time for walks, and it was not safe. Haman wanted to treat everyone. However, she couldn't find her wallet. The doctor came to her aid and said that the girl could use his wallet, but she would never make fun of him again. Kalia felt happy. The child was growing and developing healthily. However, a strange feeling of emptiness kept haunting her. It seemed that she had lost something long ago and could not find it anywhere around her. She tried to convince herself that she hadn't forgotten anything in Rojas, but her thoughts kept returning to Simon and how he was suffering there without her and making everyone around him suffer. Simon also couldn't find his place at all. Even when he slept, visions of the girl wouldn't let him go. Lately, he had been dreaming of his closeness with Kalia and the events of that evening when they were alone. The servants under his command often heard his cries at night as he begged General Kalia to return. In fact, he was thinking about how he would deal with her the next time they met. But what scared him most was the prospect that she might not return. The young man hoped that at least after they became friends, he would be able to be close to Kalia and help her in every way. The guy understood that all his achievements were only for the sake of becoming famous and attracting the girl's attention to himself. And now it seemed that everything was in vain. Without Kalia, happiness and pleasure disappeared. After she saved his life as a child, the boy belonged to her completely. He tried to understand why his girlfriend did not pay attention to him despite all his efforts. Many people around him started gossiping. Now she was entertaining at least a business trip. The servants reported that repair work at the port had resumed, and the Magic Guild of Tian was waiting for him. The young man did not seek to meet officially with those misers and libertines. Some of the boys who accompanied Simon had considered joining the Ministry of Magic, but many said that it was almost impossible for ordinary people. Girls on the streets looked at Simon. They considered him a real handsome man. However, only those close to him knew that he was a real devil incarnated in a human body. He didn't need anyone except the general. Even a trip that was supposed to last a month was cut short by the young man at his own discretion to 2 weeks. Only one of the servants knew about his master's true secret. It was this boy who created the scroll used that night. He could not share his guesses with anyone, because he could easily suffer at the hands of Simon or Kalia. It does not matter who deals with him. He will suffer and endure incredible pain from the torturers. The magician's attention was drawn to a man near the shop who was putting up a sign. Many locals and visitors decided to ask what was going on there. The sign emphasized that they were selling a pink pearl. One of Simon's companions reported that this artifact is only sold in these parts, and it is very special and rare. For the past 100 years, this pearl has not left the land of Tian and belonged only to the local aristocracy. Simon listened attentively to the conversation of his companions. He was interested in the fact that this pearl was a precious ornament. But the words about the symbolism of family and happiness with this pearl put an end to his hesitation. The guys also talked about the gossip that people who gave each other this pearl even die on the same day. Therefore, young people treat such a gift responsibly. The next moment, the magician rushed to the store and soon became the owner of a beautiful artifact, which, according to experienced magicians and sorcerers, was a symbol of love and fidelity. This ended their stay. The boys looked at their proud boss. No one had even a doubt that it would go to Lady Kalia. Now he was thinking about how he could beautifully present the pearl to his beloved. The day of the carnival and festival had come. Everything around was beautiful and decorated. Ships with guests were arriving every minute, and soon there was no free space on the streets of the city. There was noise and shouting all around. Kalia decided to have some fun and ordered a street artist to paint her portrait. However, for some reason, it took longer than planned. The man asked his model not to move around. The general was asleep. Next to Kalia slept Hamming. The faithful squire did not leave his mistress even on the street during the festival. After all, the safety of her lady now depended only on herself and her vigilance and diligence. However, the woman in labor herself thought that her servant was being quite practical. She also needed to finally get some sleep, because she would soon not have such an opportunity. And the matter was not only about the birth of the child. Kalia trained humming in the garden. The general passed on her experience in wielding a sword, and the girl listened carefully to her and followed all instructions and orders. The squire appreciated the lady's support and was grateful. Haman constantly thanked Kalia for her attention to her humble person. It was rare that a general and hero of the empire would think of helping a simple girl, a lowly descendant of ordinary people. The pregnant lady asked if the girl had thought about choosing a suitable mentor in the capital or entering a magic academy or a guard academy. Humming said that she only wanted to be with Kalia. From the moment the general saved her, the girl never left her savior. She was very loyal to her and did not even entertain the idea of leaving the general and going to someone else. That's why Kalia decided to make the girl a real master. And although she didn't take part in a real battle, the girl had a unique instinct. And she perfectly wields a one-handed sword. The general remembered that a good one-handed sword, which would be perfect for her subordinate, was in the palace in the capital. And upon her return, she would definitely give it to the girl. However, something was bothering her and confusing her thoughts. Kalia saw a little girl running to her mother crying. The girl was screaming loudly and calling her friend by name. The woman asked what happened because they were just supposed to play and come back. But the little girl said that was how it was at first. Then everyone realized that Sage and Johann had gone to the forbidden felt forest, and something had happened to them there. The little girl was very scared and ran home to warn the adults. Kalia couldn't just leave it like that. She woke up the squire and told him they had to go home. The girl asked if they had forgotten anything there. The general said something like that. Alan was just leaving his client's room when he saw Lady Kalia and her squire running down the street. He once again decided to read the notes to the woman who was not listening to him. They did not answer his questions. At home, Kalia gave orders to her own. She dismissed the servants, and Alan and the girl learned about what they had now found out when the children had disappeared and what had happened before in similar situations. Hamming said that everything would be done, and all this time the lady was to sit at home safely and wait for their return. The general replied that she would obey her and would constantly help her morally. After a while, the squire told her that the children had thrown a ball into the felt territory. The children climbed to get it and disappeared, so the girl immediately ran to her mother and told her everything. Kalia thought that only 2 hours had passed, so there was still time to search. There was a huge possibility that the children were still alive and could be saved from problems or death. Even the adults believed in it. Hamming said that the locals had gathered in droves to search for the missing children, although most did not believe that they could remain alive. And after sunset, the Feltry's lands became no safer than the lands of demons. Kalia thought that no one would want to go there now. Everyone would wait until more volunteers gathered, and the search wouldn't start until tomorrow, which meant that in the end, only the parents would go looking for the missing. Alan understood what his mistress was getting at. He said that Lady Kalia herself had spoken of the dangers in the elven lands, so he wouldn't even think of visiting the deep forest on his own to rescue the children. The lady replied that she did not go back on her words. But it is worth noting that the lands of the elves are dangerous only for ordinary people, and it is worth making it before sunset. The night forest is dangerous even for her. However, the only person who could still save the children in the lands of the Feltry was Kalia herself. She would do everything safely and return. However, she would need help. Because of her pregnancy, it was difficult for her to move. The woman believed that she simply had to go and help the locals. After all, she was the one who had the strength and abilities. Now the question arose whether she would be able to do it without harming her child. If something like this had happened before, Kalia wouldn't have even thought about it. If she were even an ordinary person, she wouldn't have refused to join the search. And now she would be risking her own boy. But the time had come to give orders, no matter how difficult they seemed to Kalia. Alan was ordered to wait for the general at the entrance to the forest. He was about to say something to her, but realized that it would make no sense. The girl assured the doctor that the missing people couldn't have gotten very far into the depths of the forest, so they would go looking for them in a group. Demons are not scary in the elven forest because they have been the most bitter enemies for centuries. Kalia said that elves do not like to act by force. Their greatest advantage is the use of magical illusions. However, it is worth remembering that they have reliable protection against illusions and deceptions of the felt. The general reassured the doctor, saying that she had a really good way to counter and fight off an onslaught of attackers if that happened. Unfortunately, she couldn't tell him everything. Kalia asked Hamming to join her. She had no right to ask such a thing of her squire, but the girl answered immediately. She was ready to go anywhere for her mistress without unnecessary talk. The general added that the girl was the only person she could completely trust and rely on in any matter. After all, over the years of service, they had become very close, although they kept their distance. The guards from the local barracks guarded the entrance to the elven forest. No one was allowed there until the commandant gave the appropriate order. The children's lives had already ceased to worry many people, except for their relatives. The mother rushed to the forest through the security, but no one let her in. Everyone felt sorry for the children, but no one wanted to go to this place before sunset. So the search was officially postponed until volunteers were recruited. Kalia was walking through the clearing. Humming was hurrying after her, carrying a scroll in her hands. The girl was asking her mistress why they couldn't do anything about the felt forest if it was so dangerous and a threat. The woman explained that you can't do anything by force, but you can't negotiate with the owner of the forest either. Magical creatures don't really want to make contact with people, even despite the non-aggression agreement between them. The king of the elves did not personally like the king of men, and the forests in which the Felters lived were like blood vessels, which eventually converged to the center, which was the deep forest. Despite everything, the people put up with it. The entrance to such places is normally monitored only in large cities, and in settlements like this, security measures are limited to such signs prohibiting entry into elven territory. But most often they get there through holes in fences that no one normally monitors. Right now, they were standing in front of such a fence. After their return, it is necessary to report this to the garrison. But Humming quickly put everything back together herself. The fence looked as good as new. Kalia praised her servant. After all, someone else might have accidentally come in here, and then they would have had even more work. The girl pleased the lady. Soon they were both walking through a magical forest. The general and her assistant were armed with swords. Haming asked if they had gone too far into elven territory. Kalia replied that the only thing to be wary of was illusions. But in reality, not everything was so good. At the entrance to the forest, Kalia saw strange, huge tracks that looked like a dog or a wolf. She remembered the last time she had seen anything like that. Most likely, a Lakanavok could have wandered here. Judging by the lack of tracks, these were outcasts from the pack, and there couldn't be many of them. However, meeting them after sunset was not a desirable option. Previously, it would have been a simple matter, but not now. In her current state, it would be difficult for the lady to deal with them, but 2 or 3 lichens would not pose a threat to the two of them anyway. But suddenly she wondered why the demonic animals had entered the elven forest. Haming also began to suspect something. She wondered how it could have happened that demonic monsters had entered the forest of elves, who hated them more than humans themselves. But the girl was not afraid. She soberly assessed her capabilities and promised that she might not be very good as a fighter, but she would be a good human shield for her mistress. Kalia thanked her for her devotion. Lichen jumped out of the bushes. It roared loudly and was not afraid of anyone. This monster was truly impressive in its size. It seemed that Kalia was numb with fear. Humming was scared for her and worried. But the general quickly repulsed the enemy. She was surprised by the strange behavior of the animal. It did not even try to avoid the blow with its sword, which was a logical move for such an enemy. Kalia noticed that the lichen was behaving strangely, and his appearance was also strange. The attacker's entire body was covered in old scars and wounds, and his eyes were for some reason empty. He was something like a madman. Suddenly, he stood up and began to run towards the forest. Blood dripped from his severed hand. Escaping into the depths of the Feltry's domain in such a helpless state for a demon was almost a fatal move for a desperate man. Kalia calmed the girl, who suggested chasing the monster. With such a body, the demon would not be able to escape far, and most likely the Felts would deal with it on their own. Hamming was delighted with her mistress. They were distracted from their conversation by a strange girl who was looking at them from behind a tree. She was smiling and waving her hands. But as it turned out, only Kalia herself had seen this creature. General realized that she had seen an elf. Hamming asked if it was possible that this vision was the result of the effects of hallucinogenic mushrooms. But the commander-in-chief replied that such mushrooms only show what a person most wants. Kalia thought that elves were actually social creatures. It was quite strange to see a lonely Felty. Today, in general, seemed very unusual to the general in its events. But suddenly she saw her again. Instead of running away, the Delphic girl crept closer, but she did it very clumsily. Kalia asked again if Humming could see the girl. The squire replied that she couldn't see anything. The general realized that it was an illusion or something like that, and the creature didn't even try to hide. And then Kalia remembered something, but she shouldn't be distracted.